Hey, Facebook. It's us again, Bryan and Heather, and we are excited to be with you on this Friday afternoon. So we're going to be talking autism. All right, Heather, you and I are just kind of by the seat of our pants, so we're just kind of, we already know all this stuff, right? But as far as putting it all together and being prepped, we just kind of go with the flow. So let's talk about you. What do you tell me? I'm a parent. I come in. What's and my son has autism, right? Okay, so talk to me. Like, what are you looking at as far as from a brain-based clinical setting? What are you all looking at there at Brain Balance?
We regardless of what the challenges are that come in, we look at over 900 functions on every child, but we also know kind of some profiles, but just like with any other challenge, autism, I mean, it's called the autism spectrum for a reason. Mm-hmm. And what used to be called Asperger's is now called high functioning autism. Mm-hmm. And so we have some people that if you don't have a certain background, you may not even know you may not consider them to be on the spectrum. You just think they're quirky, and maybe a little introverted and not super social. But then there are others that I think is the stereotypical that people think of, where there is no engagement and they might be banging their head into the wall, or they like just spin, very, very rigid routines necessary, no emotional regulation, that kind of thing. And so, but it goes to brain connectivity. We know that in general. We've talked about Dr. Thomas Insel and him going on a big YouTube cast and just talking about what the research says. And it is just a plethora of research that tells us that a lot of these challenges are lack of connectivity in the brain, and specifically usually in the right hemisphere more, but it affects many parts of the brain. And that, it's really interesting is sometimes you can see awkward movements in these kids, but we talk all the time about how the sensory motor system communicates with our prefrontal cortex, where all of our getting stuff done skills are, our sense of self.
Like that.
And that is just sometimes more visible in some of these kids, but it boils down to lack of brain connectivity, primitive reflexes, sensory motor, and all of those things. So.
Okay, awesome. So let's, I'm going to ask, I know the answer to the question, but I'm going to ask the question, okay? So when you're talking about brain connection, right? So I like to think as a whole brain functioning together. So what you're saying is the parts are there, right? Like the brain parts are there, but they're not talking well as a whole, correct?
That's right. And one thing that's really, I think, vital to understand here is so many of these kids, whether it's autism or not, have these areas where they shine. I mean, there's the term savant. You hear about kids who can play Beethoven when they're 5 years old and nobody even taught them, or they can do these complex math calculations, or they know more facts and figures than I'll know in my entire life. And that's very cool. I mean, that's neat. We all have strengths and weaknesses. Having said that, let's say that a child is 10 years old and they have certain skills that are like the details and facts and figures, literal, concrete, calculation kind of stuff, that they're 10, and those abilities are a 16-year-old. And then they have other areas of the brain as a 10-year-old that maybe are 2-3 years old. That sometimes the gifts make it even a bigger disconnect than if I am average in skills and below average over here.
Right.
A 3-year-old and a 16-year-old don't have a very connecting conversation. It's not the same as like you and I are talking and we're just connecting on a deep level and we're on the same wavelength. Your worlds are completely different.
Right.
And so with all gifts, sometimes there's just a confounding struggle as well, and vice versa.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You said something that triggered a thought, and I was going to go there. Yeah. Okay. So, like, So as far as the hemispheres go, this is another question, right? So we have a hemisphere and a region of the brain that's more detail oriented, more, just kind of knowing all the little steps. And then we have a more like global hemisphere, right? To where we're
Right.
looking 30,000 feet. Can you talk a little bit about that and how we see this in autism and all this?
Yes. Most of the kids, actually all of the kids I've worked with, I just don't like using all and none thinking, but in all these decades, I cannot think of a time this was not true.
Yeah.
And it almost always is, that kids on the spectrum usually have much greater difficulty getting the big picture, the context, the overriding theme than they do the details. And sometimes, autism or not, when that happens, sometimes it appears that they have difficulty getting the details when in fact that's their strength. But details don't mean as much if I don't have a context in which to put them. So I can know all of these facts and figures, and I can spout off. You're like, what is, I can't do this, I'm pretending, but what is 4,127 times 346? Some of these kids will be like, boom, it's that. But what does that mean, and how does it apply in this? We're trying to figure out our finances for, during COVID-19. They may miss the context of that. Give me the calculations and I can do it, but I may not understand the ramifications of what's going on. And so they both strengthen one another. If I get the big picture, I have a place to put the details that is meaningful and not just random disjointed facts. If I see the big picture and can't remember the details, that's also problematic.
Yeah. So, okay. So two things I want to, first one, kind of a yes, no answer. This is what I'm looking for in this one.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
You're like,
we see this with others and kids not kids, kiddos who have not been diagnosed with autism. We see this in other things like maybe ADHD and some other neurodevelopmental stuff as well.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So the reason I bring that up is because one of the examples that really clicked well with me for whatever reason was it was this story about writing out how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I think it was an OT that explained this. I thought this is such a cool way of doing it. But, the child knows what the peanut butter is, what 2 slices of bread is, but they can't conceptualize the end product. And so the list, it's not that the list doesn't make sense, but putting the list together to make sense is the issue there. And so it just was such a neat way of thinking about it. Like, this is just 2 different parts of the brain, right? Like, you have to be able to take these pieces and put them together. And so very neat. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you're looking at what you said, over 900?
Yes.
Okay. So, and does that matter with a diagnosis? Let's clarify. If I come in, my son has autism versus, whatever, OCD or ADHD, would that matter?
It matters. It doesn't matter as far as the assessment.
Right.
The program we need to set up needs to be very personalized and individualized. We really customize it for each person, not only based upon their areas of deficit and strengths, but also who they are as a human being.
Yes.
But the reason we look at those things in an assessment, regardless of diagnosis, not diagnosis, or different ones, is because we know what the building blocks of development are.
Right.
And it's no stone unturned. That there's just a huge issue sometimes. I've used the example before when my dad had a brain tumor and lost half his brain, and there was a new normal, and then his status changed drastically. And the doctors had in their minds, and I'm not, it was just, it's kind of human nature. I'm describing these challenges that are brand new for him. And they're like, Heather, he has half a brain. I said, I know, but I knew what he was before. I knew the different new normal after that. This is completely different. And I had to start all over with a new neurologist. And I'm like, he has Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's, but it was just like, it's a brain tumor. So we have to be careful that happens with kids with dyslexia sometimes. Or they get diagnosed with dyslexia, and that's not what it is, or it is, but they also have visual perception and processing challenges. We have to make sure we have all of the bases covered.
I love that. So yeah, you and I know we agree on this. So we don't look at the diagnosis. That's not the individual, right? We want to see the whole person, right? And so in doing so, I love it. So that's why y'all do that. So, but I like to make that clear because I think in our office we get that question like, my child has this diagnosis. Is there like a ADHD protocol, or there is certain ways that you may help those individuals or certain things that you're looking for, but as a whole, the child comes in as an individual with their own individual concerns and deficits and things that we need to work with. So
100%. It's still true to everything we just said. One caveat, just to clarify that I did not, is of course based upon not their chronological, but their developmental age. That's what matters.
Yes.
Some kids are going to do more tasks than the others based on development, know, and so the better they do on some things, the more tasks they're going to end up doing, and we can do deeper dives. But if their roadblock is at an earlier point, so it's not that they're all alike because it's based on developmental age, but we start with the same foundation because same with you, we have to get to the root. It's not just about not based it on diagnoses. It's also not based on symptoms. It's based on what's causing everything, looking under the hood.
Yeah. So, okay. So I obviously test a lot, right? So, but what are some common tests that are performed that you consistently see, like maybe primitive reflexes, or what are you commonly seeing in kiddos with autism diagnosis, or just what we suspect is autism? What are you commonly seeing?
A lot of them aren't even able to engage in the executive function assessment that we do with our partnership with Cambridge. But most of the time, and it depends on the child and the severity, but if they're coming to see us, they usually have all of their primitive reflexes still present. And for anyone who hasn't watched this before, primitive reflexes are the survival mechanisms we are born with. And a baby will grasp your finger in their palm, or the reading reflex. A baby can't say, "I'm hungry, what's my food?" But they can turn toward the source of the food, the rooting reflex. But there are multiples of those that we look at, and it's not just a yes, no, how severe are they? Because even that will impact not only what we do in center, but the home program as well. And when you still have primitive reflexes, you are living in survival mode, and not based on conscious thoughts and feelings. And that underlies it. We have to talk about language a little bit. I'll hold off on that. But you cannot have an age-appropriate sensory motor system and primitive reflex. They cannot coexist.
Right.
In typical development, being exposed, being held, playing with your, any sort of proprioception. You have a mobile over your cradle. You're exposed to texture and foods and smells and all of that. That is what makes those go away. And with kids with autism, they don't go away, and we learn about our world through our sensory motor system. So therefore, when we look at all of the senses and test all of those, and all of the gross and fine motor, those haven't developed because they're still in the primitive stage.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they don't know. So you talked about chronological and neurological age, right? And so someone could be 8, 9, 10, 11, but neurologically, because of primitive reflexes and the way that their sensory system is not integrated, their development would be much lower. Correct?
That's exactly.
Okay.
And understanding that in the different areas we look at, even it's not like they're one developmental age. They can have certain skills where they're an 18-month-old, and certain skills where they're a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they may have skills where they're 2 years above their age.
Right.
So in one child, you can have many different ages of development. Going back to that 16-year-old and 3-year-old, we have all these different ages that are all living different worlds. And what you're trying to communicate to me in these different parts of the brain doesn't make sense because I'm up here and you're down here, or vice versa.
Absolutely, yes. So you can um, it's like multiple children all wrapped into one as far as like developmentally. Like
Yes, that's a great way to say it. Yes.
they'll have different skill sets and different situations.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Um, so Ruben, I actually don't know the answer to this question. So they come in, they get a neurological exam. Now, one of the biggest things that I'm always asked when a little autistic kiddo comes in is, what are we doing for their diet? So are you all looking at that? Is that important for you all? I mean, tell us a little bit.
That is so important. Even with or without autism, but it tends to be more extreme in our kids on the spectrum.
Okay.
Is that 85% of the kids with brain imbalances, which is those different ages of development, have food sensitivities or food allergies. Food allergies get diagnosed more easily because there are such physical manifestations that we think of when we think of allergies, eczema, or something that's not being able to breathe, getting stopped up based on exposure to things. But the body and the brain are so intertwined.
Yep.
90% of the fibers of the vagus nerve communicate directly with the gut. And we talked before about how so many cells in the fight or flight system, which also relates to those primitive reflexes, are the same cells that make up our digestive system. So if my body and my brain are not communicating, it's just like big picture doesn't make sense to me. The same thing is I don't know how to break down foods. If my gross motor hasn't developed because I'm stuck in that primitive phase, then that also will impact intestinal motility to break down the food. And so what happens too is a lot of these kids have a lot of vitamin deficiencies. They are not absorbing the nutrients from the foods. And it just sort of compounds. Not to mention what we've talked about several times, the spinal gland. With the stimulation of the lower back stimulates the hips. A lot of these kids are very particular about the clothing they wear. You have to pay attention to tags and seams and the type of material, how tight or loose it is, socks and shoes, that kind of thing. And it may not be all of those, but it impacts it impacts sleep, it impacts digestion. So we remove one food at a time to figure out what is and is not causing this particular child challenges. Because if you just do a drastic overhaul on day one, you don't know which factors accounted for the improvements.
What was the largest impact, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Do you do that simultaneously? This I don't know either. Do you do that simultaneously with the neurological things that you're doing, or do you break them up?
We used to do testing during the assessment for that, but needles aren't the friend of kids who are already scared coming in, and they already might have tactile sensitivities and so forth. So just doing the elimination diet as part of the program, and we have a registered dietitian who is she's registered in all 50 states, and a whole team of nutritionists that also support the families. We have a parent portal with a ton of resources and lots of exercises and lots of videos and stuff, but the nutrition component is super powerful for these kids too.
Okay. I know we're going to try to keep these a little shorter since we're doing them consistently. Let's hear. I always like to share stories, so let's talk stories here. So let's have you share a story, just of autism. A kid with autism and some miraculous. I know you have miracles in that in those all the time. So let's hear one of those miracles.
One is so crazy the way it happened. I got a call on the weekend about from this family. And the dad had flown in from Romania. They had seen an article in a magazine about brain balance and kind of my story. And they wanted to meet with me. I met with them on a Sunday afternoon. I drove up to the center and
so did they call you, or they just flew in from Romania? They're just like,
he flew in. I'm like, well, thank goodness I was in town. That could have been not so great.
Wow.
But you know what? It's like, we're going to do whatever it takes. And if I'd heard that, I probably would have come back I'm in Italy. I'm going to get back there to see them, It would have been easier because I was already in their neck of the woods over there. But 9 years old, just not able to participate in school whatsoever. If they would go to a restaurant, I mean, the impulsivity, which is that brake pedal is so important.
Yes.
And by the way, self-regulation, when you look at the functional, emotional, developmental capacities, self-regulation is the first stepping stone. You cannot be self-regulated if you're in primitive mode. And so that is why language and everything else doesn't develop. But she wasn't. There was very little communication. And before we get off here, I really have to say a few things about language and communication, because there are so many misconceptions that's a key point. But not potty trained, could not sit still for 1 second, just running around, no engagement. And she had such a miraculous turnaround and is flourishing in school, getting those primitives go away, actually engaging, that we now have families who rotate coming in from Romania, Bulgaria, other countries. They have to go back and renew visas. I write letters for the consulate and get them back. The word has spread in other countries because of the vast transformation, and it is physical, it is learning, it is having social connection and having a brake pedal, that there is self-regulation now, no more bedwetting, all of those things. She has just blossomed, but it had to be pretty miraculous for it to inspire many, many families from other countries to come see us.
Yeah, I would imagine a trip from Romania is not short, expensive, among other things. So.
You got to avoid 5 o'clock traffic. No, that tells you a lot, though. I mean, it basically, the stereotypical thing that I think goes in people's minds when they think of autism, it was pretty profound. And she just grew years in a matter of just a few months and just continues to develop. And we're still supporting them. Yeah.
That's awesome. Excuse me. I need a drink of water. This is not a COVID cough or anything crazy. Dry throat. So I just need some water. So neat. I love it. One of my favorite stories is diagnosed on spectrum. That's what they told the parents. So, and dad had seen an article that says chiropractic does not help kiddos with autism. So then he came to one of my workshops. I don't know what he wanted to get out of it. At first I didn't know if this was antagonistic or what, but I got done with it, and this little guy signs up. But he was behind in reading and speech, and they said socially he was not very interactive, very pulled in. But he's been under care for probably 6 months now, maybe a little bit longer, but it's been so long since the changes have happened. When they did the testing, what's the STAR test? Is that what it is down here? Yeah. Yes. When they did the STAR test back at the end of last year, he had exceeded a vast majority of his peers with reading and writing, and speech. So I was, to get that diagnosis, and then you and I know we agree on this, but it's kiddos are held back or viewed or stigmatized by a diagnosis. And I knew that the parents were looking, they knew something was wrong. They were trying to find an answer and a solution, but you could tell that that's one of the things they wanted to avoid, right? Was like this, like there's just something's a little off. We can't figure out what it is, but we know, but we don't know. Right. And so It's so neat to see just the dramatic changes in these kids' lives. All right. Now you want to talk about, before we leave.
Yes, I have to talk about language a little bit, because I think that is one of the biggest, I've been doing this. I spoke at the National Autism Summit. I was asked to be an expert presenter there, and I've met with families for so many decades. I know that if you have a child out there who's not engaging with you and not communicating, that's heart-wrenching. I mean, the way we connect with other people is by sharing our hearts and souls through communication. But the goal initially is not to get the child to talk. And I know that sounds weird, but communication is socially based. I want to talk to you, Bryan, because we're friends. I care how you're doing. I care about you're brilliant and you're reading all the time, and we collaborate, and that's a connection.
Right.
And I don't talk to you because I have to, So kids with autism, it's about social emotional development, and there are so many strategies out there where let's sit in this room in this very artificial environment, oh, we're going to work on eye contact. Look at me. And let's count how many times I looked at you. 7 out of 10 times you told me to look at you, I did. So my eye contact is 70% developed. Is that really true? No. Why? I looked at you because you told me to, not because I want to connect and I care how you're doing.
Right.
What is a more powerful motivator? Being told to do something, compliance, function, or I really care. I want to chat with you. So we have to get that going first. So do turn-taking games with your kids. Follow their lead. If they have autism, we need, and really in some ways, and with all kids, but especially in this population, there's no place where that's more true. So if they're kind of over in a corner, like escaping you, you gently go over there and you sit down in the corner with them. If they're fixated on a spatula, guess what? That becomes a game of peekaboo. You engage in their interest, watch what has their interest, what kind of sensory input are they seeking, and then make a game out of it. They make a silly face or a sound, you make it back at them. You start imitating them, they imitate you, but it starts by following their lead. Observe what they're doing. Where are they in this? Wait, because they need time to communicate in the way. I wasn't telling you to. Did you think that? No, it's owl. Observe, wait. I'm so sorry. That's not what I was saying. Give them time to respond. Be less anticipatory. Put things out of their reach. Clear see-through bins that they can't open without themselves. If you're playing bubbles, teach them how to request it and meet them where they are. And then open the bubbles and maybe blow 1 or 2 bubbles, and then you close the lid again. You can get 50 opportunities to teach that cause and effect of I want something, so then I engage with you to get it. Instead of I only had to ask one time, that's not going to stick. And everybody in the family needs to be on the same page with that. And then if they are verbal, or if their echolalia is big, and some people think that is not, doesn't mean anything. All they're doing is repeating me. There are many different kinds of echolalia. We don't have time to go into it. I know right now, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. But echolalia is not meaningless. A lot of times, I know I'm supposed to say something to you, but I don't really get how this works. So I just repeat what you said. Like if you say, how are you doing? I might say, how are you doing? And so what you want to do is if you're teaching them to ask for juice, instead of saying, oh, you want juice, you want to say, I want juice. You say it the way they, from their perspective, to start teaching them. They hear what you're saying, and then you teach them how to say it back. Those are just a few. Social stories are excellent. freespirit.com, social emotional books, but social stories help kids understand the world. But just engage with them and meet them where they are. There are also, I know we're not huge on screen time, but if they are on screens, because I'm just realistic and I know that they are,
the world we live in. Yep.
You want to limit it, but quality program, not all screen time is created equally. Choice works, autism apps are good. There are, I Can Do, Emotions. There are several good apps. And if they're watching something on TV related, sometimes kids, because of that big picture you talked about, they may know certain things when they're watching The Wiggles, or I can't think, Mr. Wiggles, whatever it is. They may know certain things, but then find a book that has some of those same concepts, and they start connecting it and getting the big picture and generalizing information. If I don't get big picture, I also don't know how to generalize eye contact with you. I'm also supposed to do that with this friend and this friend. So teaching context, generalize it for them. I know we're going to go short today, but
I think that I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I was going to say I think this would be a good next week topic. I think this is a very important thing that you're talking about, communication and how they're communicating and how we can connect with them, because that is a huge concept which I don't think is discussed nearly enough.
It's not. I would love to talk about dyadic attention, triadic attention, and all the things that lead up to communication. As you know, I started out early in my career as a medical speech language pathologist. This is definitely in my wheelhouse. And I also have lots of autism certifications. So I'm really passionate about this. And it is one of the biggest kind of missing links in what people know, I have found. So.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. That's why I think we might be doing it a disservice to try to,
because I'm trying to rush through a few things. Yeah.
No, I like everything you said. So let's next week, let's talk on that. Let's summarize this again. Because what you were saying in the beginning is kiddos with autism tend to struggle with integration, right? Like we're different. Well, we're different hemispheres and different areas of the brain are not communicating as a whole, right? So the first thing we need to look at are what? Primitive reflexes? Yes.
Primitive reflexes, the sensory motor system. If we don't get that in place, the other stuff is not going to come along. It's just not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for parents who are still watching, if you've jumped on, look, this is a great 30-minute interview. I've loved every second of it. But if you're looking, we have to start with things for integrating the brain. You have to identify, are there primitive reflexes? What reflexes are there? And then you can start that process. And then the sensory motor system. But obviously, if you have primitive reflexes, that sensory motor system is not integrated well. And that can lead to fight or flight, vagus nerve issues. We got a lot going on there. So,
but imitate, turn, take, engage, follow their lead. Those are just a few quickies, and be less anticipatory, create barriers between them and what they want. We'll talk more later.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very that could be a couple week topic. I think in the end.
Yeah.
But okay, awesome. Let's talk about that. Heather, a parent wants to know how to get a hold of you. How do they get a hold of you?
Wells, WELLS @brainbalance.com. We're doing virtual assessments now and providing resources for families, setting them up on virtual programs during these mandates. So anything I can do for you, just let me know. I'm happy to. And you saw that because I saw y'all joined with me too. I started an Instagram account. I joined this decade finally. And I haven't posted yet, but I'm going to start posting this weekend. And is it called handle? I don't even know. Whatever that thing is. It's The Hidden Churn, the name of my book. But it's not just about my book, but I'm going to be putting a lot of quality resources there. And or you can follow our pages, because we always put up things about all kinds of topics, including autism, Brain Balance of Southlake, Brain Balance of Mansfield, Brain Balance of Katy on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram. So that was a lot.
Yeah. All right. They can DM you as well. All right.
Yes.
And then your phone number is on those pages, all right?
It is, yes.
All right. Awesome. If you need to get a hold of me, Dallas Synergy Chiropractic, you can call or text 972-387-4700. We are also doing what we call telehealth consults, so we can set one of those up with you as well. All right, Heather, we have a fun and exciting conversation coming up next week. I'm going to do some reading because I felt a little behind in that conversation. I'm going to catch up a little bit. But
this will be a good one. I am too. This will be great. It'll be very valuable. Yeah.
Awesome. So those who are watching, make sure you tune in next week. We're trying to do we had technical errors this time, but Fridays at 3:30 every week. And we're just going to give you a half an hour of awesomeness. If this helped you, please share. Let other parents know. We are trying to do this for you to help you better understand your children, better communicate with your children, and just better serve you as communities. All right, Heather, anything they need to know?
I don't think so. Well, I will tell you that I am doing Facebook Lives on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:30 also on all of those same pages, and just covering a variety of topics on education, social, emotional, anxiety, you name it, what to do at home right now with your kids. So.
Busy. Awesome. I love it. All right. Please share, like, and let other parents know. Again, thank you so much, Heather, and I look forward to next week's.
Thank y'all too. Yeah.
We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.